Welcome to The Thriving Marriage, the podcast for those who want to get their spouse back in love with them and truly thrive.
You'll learn why 95% of people don't save their marriage and the secret method no one else is talking about that will change everything for you. Are you ready? Let's turn tragedy to triumph.
Here are your hosts, international marriage experts, Mark Johnston and Heather Choate.
It's good to be doing the podcast together again.
Yeah, it has definitely been a while. We had the holidays, and then I had the baby, and then we had like medical issues after that, and then now we're right into COVID-19. Mark and I were just talking about kind of the challenges that we're both experiencing at home, having all of our kids at home, and just how the whole world has kind of been upheaved upon us, right?
Yeah.
So we know that a lot of you are facing challenges at this time in your relationships, and maybe things are more stressful than ever before. And I did a poll here in the Thriving Marriage Facebook group to kind of figure out what kind of challenges you guys are facing, where things are at in your marriage. And one of the biggest, issues was more distancing between you and your spouse. Some of you have actually noticed that this has been an amazing opportunity to get closer in your marriage, and that, you or your spouse have kind of realized what your real priorities are. And so you're actually drawing closer together. You're communicating more. But for the majority of the people in the group, actually more distancing is occurring. So today we're going to talk about how to overcome emotional distancing specifically. So if your spouse is pulling away from you emotionally, if you're experiencing stonewalling, blocks in your connection, blocks in your communication, Mark and I are going to talk about some little known causes of emotional distancing. Why does it really happen, right? If my spouse is pulling away from me, or if I'm pulling away from them and I'm feeling that need to have some distance there, what are the root causes of that so that we can resolve those? And then some proven practices for reconnecting and building a stronger emotional bond. That's our goal and that's our intention. And we're really grateful and excited to be here with you to share that today. At the very end, we're also going to talk about what healing distancing is, healing separation is, and if it's a good idea for your marriage or not. So if that's been a question in your marriage or on your mind, make sure you stay to the end as we're going to talk about that. Before we get to that, we're going to go over our client win of the week. And we'll say this one comes from Matthew, name changed here. He says, #win. This is a consistent thought within me and pertains to the seeds this program has planted and the seeds I have planted in my relationship. So much has changed since the end of December. And he's writing this now here at the beginning of April. I would not have been able to withstand this current world crisis, meaning COVID-19, that's what we're in the middle of right now, if I had not wanted something completely different than what I had only 3 months ago. My wife is an amazing individual, my soulmate, and I am so fortunate to still have her. Our strengths have been tested over and over again throughout the years, and the difference now is that I don't feel like a victim. So on the mindset side, like that just fires me up, because that transformation there of going from feeling like a victim to his circumstances to now the biggest difference that he's recognizing is he doesn't feel like a victim. And I like that he's talking about planting seeds that he's learned in our program and that he wanted for his marriage, and that he's starting to see some of those results. So it's a fabulous job. Good job, Matthew. Super proud of you. All right, so going to come over here to Mark, our international marriage expert that we're so grateful to have with us, about emotional distancing. So Mark, just right off the bat, what is emotional distancing, and what are some of maybe the root causes that people don't think about when it comes to emotional distancing?
Well, I think, a lot of times, even if we don't give it a very specific definition, we won't, but even if we wouldn't, a lot of people can recognize it. Your partner starts pulling away, there's maybe less interest in connecting. I'm sure many of you have seen it at least at some point in your marriage. If you've been married long enough, there's been at least moments where you're like, I just don't want to deal with my spouse. But it's going to take a lot of different forms here. Like maybe your partner, your spouse isn't as willing to share with you. They don't want to talk about their day. They don't want to. They don't want to have that time to connect. Perhaps they're actively pushing you away or rejecting bids for connection. Like as you are trying to spend time with them or to talk with them, and they actually say, "Don't talk to me. I don't want to talk about it." They're actively pushing you away. It might be like a really hard stonewall, meaning they're just not talking at all. And I would say, those things like those rejections or that's a really hard stonewalling are a little bit more serious than just not wanting to talk. But in some cases, it might look a little bit different as well. Some cases, it's more that anger comes out and a lot of blame happens, and they're effectively shutting out your point of view, which we don't often think about it in those terms. We don't say, okay, anger is an emotional disconnection, but especially in this sort of context, when when someone's point of view isn't considered, is shut down, it is a form of emotional distancing, and that will often come out with anger. But whatever it looks like, what's going on is that your spouse has become more distant and isn't really, this is the kind of the key thing, isn't really seeking you out anymore. And this by itself can be an early sign of more serious problems, or it could just simply be a short-term sort of thing. Either way, it should be addressed and taken care of if you're able to. Now, like for instance, I'm going to admit that during this time period, it's a more stressful time. And for me, I'm a little bit more of an introverted person. So, when my stress is ramped up, I tend to turn in on myself a little bit more. And, I talk with my wife about this is why, this sort of thing is okay. But I've noticed that as both of our stress levels have ramped up, in the evening, we are, spending a little bit less time together. We're needing a little bit more alone time to recharge. And like I said, Jen and I are finding this fine because we're communicating this and we're saying, I would love to spend more time with you. I'm just really stressed, and we're making that very clear. But, a lot of times that communication isn't going on. And so I'm saying there are phases sometimes, but, this is certainly, if it's not tracked well, if you don't keep a close eye on it, it can turn into something more serious. So, I think, Heather, you're talking about, in the introduction, we were talking about some possible causes. But before we get into, do you and Ben see this at all in your relationship? I imagine there's some ups and downs here, sometimes with how close you're feeling with Ben.
Right. And like you mentioned right now, like with all the stress of COVID-19 going on, it's unprecedented times in our culture and in our world and also in our relationships. It's fascinating to me, okay, because we've got this idea of social distancing, but now we're all crammed into our house with our own family. And so like, while we should, I guess maybe in theory, feel more close and connected to the people that actually matter like the most to us, instead, it feels like help, like, oh my goodness, SOS, I don't know how to really handle this, because first of all, most of us are used to going to the workplace or have our kids going to school and having more, external socializing going on. Yesterday was my daughter's 9th birthday. So we had it at home, like, sorry, kiddo, that's just what it is. And I know I'm not alone in that. In fact, I just have a comment here from one of our Facebook members. I need so much space and I need distance. Yes, please. Now, I don't know if that's in reference to, just in general, that's what's going on in their relationship, or like some of us are just like, I need some more space right now because I'm cooped up with my own family, with my own spouse, or whatever your situation might be. But maybe you're also on the opposite end of the spectrum. So I always want to be respectful to everyone's journey and not, make assumptions. Maybe you're really lonely. Maybe you're on the, like maybe the social distancing, you're in a situation right now where you feel really alone and you feel really isolated, right? So we have kind of the whole spectrum there.
I'm talking a lot with clients actually about this, and I'm actually seeing two different camps here. The ones where this is bringing people closer together, and the ones where people are needing more space. And what I found, like the people who are taking this time and it's bringing them closer together, I'm not saying that they're devoid of other problems, but there are probably less. There tends to be less bids for their attention throughout the day. So almost universally, the people who I've noticed who are coming closer together with this are people who have, say, older children, or who feel very secure in their jobs right now. A lot of people do not. So essentially, if there's less bids for their attention and less stress, this can be a really nice time to come together. But I don't know about you, Heather, but spending the weekend with my kids, after they've been cooped up all week, and at the end of the day, I was feeling a little bit overtouched. Like, we have little kids who really want to snuggle and cuddle all the time and need our attention, and that's just it raises up a little bit of that stress level, or that all those bids for attention. And that's why, like I was explaining earlier, my Jen and I are needing a little bit more alone time than normal at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I'm at with Ben as well. Like, yesterday I was like, I just need to go shopping because that's the only thing I can do right now. Like, I just need to go shopping because I need to get, go grocery shopping and get some things. But it was more that I just need some space and I need to take that breather moment. And like you, Mark, Ben and I really had to work on communicating that and understanding each other. Now, Ben mentioned last week when we were on the podcast, like, he's going through an incredibly challenging time. Like, he related this to, it's almost as stressful as when we went through cancer, although it's not as serious, which is kind of funny because things can be just as stressful even if they're not as serious, depending on how we handle them and what kind of like triggers those bring up for us. And right now he's working to create a real estate business while this pandemic is going on. Not great timing to have to handle two really big things, right? As well as being a father and a pilot and everything else that he does. He's incredible, but it's been really, really overwhelming for him. And in the past, if one of us pulled away, and we're going to talk about this, some of these like more simple causes that can cycle into more serious causes, like more serious issues with distancing. In the past, if he would have been stressed out and kind of pulled away emotionally, because that's what he does, that's how he processes. When he's stressed out, he doesn't want to overreact or hurt anyone, so he really clams up. And for me, I'm like, let's talk it out. Let's get it. Let's like go through the mud so we can get to the heaven, right? And I always want to push to get to the comfortable part, and I do that more externally processing, right? And so that can it has in the past created a lot of challenges for us, where he would pull away because he's dealing with his own thing, but I'm not sure if it's his own thing or not because he's not communicating it in the way that I can understand it, right? And so then I would freak out and then cause some kind of more, like pull away myself, or, wait until things got so tense that then I'd kind of blow up about it and I'd force him to talk about it, right? And it got really ugly. And I've talked about these kind of negative cycles that we got into before. And it really all stems from this idea of emotional distancing and striving first to understand where he's coming from rather than just reacting out of fear, because that emotional distancing, even in a small amount, used to be very scary to me. I used to feel it like on a core emotional, like neurological level. If he was distant from me at all, I'd always assume it was my fault and that something was wrong with me. And I would internalize it. And then I'd have to try to make a big thing about it in order to resolve it. So that's the cycle that it created in my marriage. And now knowing that and breaking that cycle is always with understanding first. So we're going to go into the solutions in a minute. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I'm just wanting to kind of paint the picture of what I've experienced in my marriage and how it's changed over the years as I've learned to apply some of these things. So Mark, let's go into what are some of those simple causes. We talked about just the need to have some alone time. Like, I just need a little bit of space right now, and that is okay. That's actually a healthy and a good thing. So tell us a little bit more about that. What's the difference between, I need some alone time and versus I'm wanting to distance myself emotionally from you for a really serious cause.
I think a big difference there is, like you said, it's almost can be something simple or serious, depending on the difference is how it's being described. Like if you're saying like I need alone time like right now, or I'm just needing some extra alone time, for the foreseeable, for a little bit into the future, it's very different from like I can't stand being around my spouse. I just need to be away from them. It's a little bit of that. I feel like the best course of action with this, because everyone needs some ability to get away, to have some alone time. I know I do. I know most people do. We have some of our kids though are those really extrovert type people, and they need less of that. So some, it depends on who the person is. But if your partner is needing that time for themselves, the best thing that you can do is actually give an avenue for that and make that an open discussion. So if they're saying, I just need to be by myself, great, wonderful. How can we make sure that you're getting that alone time that you need? And if you are needing that time for connection, include that in the conversation as well. I think I had a conversation like this with my wife over the weekend, like where I said, hey, I'd really like to spend some time with you this evening. I was ready to spend some time with my wife. She said, you know what, it's been a rough day. And I just need to be by myself on my phone for a little bit. And I said, great, I want to be able to give that to you. And so I said, hey, tomorrow, why don't we plan for something a little bit nicer, and we can do something then. At that point, the needs were switched, and usually it's kind of the opposite in our relationship. But we each had an avenue to get what we were looking for, and I think that's all that's needed. If your partner does need alone time or needs some time together, it's just a way for you both to say yes to what's needed.
Right, exactly, and that comes. We're going to go more into the, the what to do's, but definitely having that understanding and seeing where they're actually coming from. That's been the cure, I would say, for my fear about why Ben's doing what he's doing. When I understand, and he communicates that now to me. We always start off, if it doesn't have anything to do with like us, if we haven't made each other upset or anything, then we always say, it's not about you. I'm feeling this and this and this because this, and this. And then the other partner can be like, okay, good. Now I understand where you're coming from, and I can meet you where you're at. And I really like what you said there about the give and the take of, because, sometimes we're like craving that connection and they're wanting just some space. And so making both part of the conversation is really how you work together as a team to get your needs met. I really loved over this past weekend, there was a big worldwide conference that our church does. And it's an amazing time to just hear some really beautiful and spiritual messages. And there was one of the talks talked about a couple that were tandem bicyclists, I guess, right? So they had to work together as a couple to steer the bike, to do these competitions and to really get anywhere, right? And they talked about how for a while the captain, and I don't even know if the captain's in the front or the back. Sorry, I don't know anything about tandem bicycling, but they would call out, left turn, left turn, right turn. I don't know. They would give like the directions and the commands to the other partner, and then the other partner would know what they're doing. But after a while of working together, this couple became really in sync with each other to the point where, the one partner didn't even have to say, the captain didn't even have to say what the direction was anymore. They could like read each other's body language. They could sense when the other one was getting more fatigued. And so they had to kind of like help, overcompensate a bit to get them going and to give them a bit of a break. The other person would just kind of instinctively kick it in and help the other person out for a while. And they would switch those roles back and forth and help each other out. So rather than like competing with each other, they were complementing each other. And I thought that was a really beautiful illustration of how as couples we can learn to read each other. And I feel like that's more where Ben and I are at. I don't know about you, Mark, but I feel like I can almost instinctually sense when he's really fatigued, right? When he kind of retreats and does what he's doing. You know, after 14 years of marriage, I feel like I'm getting the hang of it a little more. But that he doesn't necessarily even have to say it as much in words. I can just sense where he's at, and he can sense where I'm at. And then I can be like, okay, you know what? You just go take a break the rest of the night. I can tell you've had like a lot today. I'll take care of the kids. I'll put them to bed, and then we can snuggle, or you can, you know, take a shower and just go relax if you want, or whatever. And we have that kind of give and take now. And if we really need to, then we'll directly communicate, like, I just need a break right now. Or I just need some help with this. And oh my goodness, I wish you could just see the difference that is like now in our relationship compared to where it was. So let's talk about how to handle some kind of temporary stresses that might cause us to need a little bit more emotional distancing, because that's definitely something that used to be a big trigger. I used to take a temporary stress and make it into a really big issue because I didn't know how to kind of have that give and take in our relationship, like I was talking about with the tandem bicyclist. I didn't know how to read my partner. So what are some examples of that? How can we kind of overcome those things?
So once again, like, these are sort of solutions for temporary. And, you know, what I'm going to say, though, is if you can be a bit more consistent handling these problems in the temporary, it actually prevents a lot of the more serious emotional distancing. Because, you know, a lot of this is making sure there's ways for people to get what they're looking for. And if everyone's feeling like they're getting what they're looking for, then there's less need for that more serious emotional distancing. But we've mentioned a lot of these solutions already. You know, things that Heather and her husband Ben and me and my wife Jen are doing within our own relationships. I think the big things to be doing here is that if there is some need for space, that there is some clear communication as to an expected end to that distance. Like Heather is mentioning, you know, sometimes she and Ben just say, I need a break. I know Jen and I do the same thing. And we say, hey, you know, later on this evening, I would like to talk, or maybe the next night. You know, Jen and I will do this sometimes, even if we're having like an argument or disagreement, and say, hey, I just need to cool off for a bit, and we're going to talk. You know, I'm going to talk after I've cooled off. You know, certainly before the end of the evening or something like that. So that would be one big thing. The reason why this is important is because, you know, this sort of dynamic is about someone being a pursuer and someone being a distancer. And, you know, if you're really wanting that distance, if you're the one needing that distance, you need to give some amount of assurance to your spouse who's trying to pursue you. Heather, like you were mentioning here, like when you saw that distance from Ben, you would get upset, you chase after him. Essentially, you would really want to make sure things were handled right then. You know, that is a good illustration of exactly what I'm talking about here. Is, you know, when there's this pursuer sort of mindset and you're not sure when or how you might be able to resolve your concerns, that stress ramps up, that anxiety ramps up. And so this is, you know, we want that communication so we can actually help the pursuing partner to calm down a little bit and be able, so that you're able to get that space that you need. If that's you. You know, if your spouse who is, you know, who is distancing, you know, if they have those solutions on how to address the emotional distancing, you know, if they're saying, once again, it's not just saying we're going to come together at this point, but like some assurance once again of what you're going to do to close that gap. Once more, here's that assurance, and that's a lot of what this is for the pursuing partner. Is if you can provide that assurance, that's the theme here. The pursuing partner is not going to need to pursue quite so much. If you, for the person who's pulling away, it's going to still be about that communication. It's going to be clear communication about what you need. And I'm going to add in a little bit here, you know, wasn't in the notes, but especially if you're providing that emotional context for your needs. I think the way you were describing things, Heather, sounds like you and Ben are doing that exactly. Right, you're saying I need space. You're like, here's the emotional context for why I need space. Things have been hard, and the kids have been, needing me a lot, and you're like explaining why this is important in an emotional way. If you're able to, if you're able to do that, chances are your partner is probably going to listen to you. It's really easy to argue or to get defensive if you're giving more logical reasons. If you say, well, I've been working all day and I've been the one taking care of the kids and you've been sitting around, you're giving these like logical points, like why you're keeping score. You're saying this is why I deserve a break. That's an environment that is much more likely to turn into an argument, a disagreement, some pain there. But if you're given that emotional context, it helps give understanding, helps your partner to understand you. So the other thing here, though, that is highly important, so beyond the communication, is your story, how you're describing this distance. If you're able to describe you and your relationship in positive terms, if you're saying, this is I just need this for right now. If you're saying, I like being around my spouse, I just need this time alone, or I like being around my spouse, but I can see that they need a break. You're describing it in temporary terms. These are all signs that the social distancing, the emotional distancing, is probably benign. It's probably simple. You're probably in a good place.
What about if you mentioned a little bit about cooling off, right? The cooling off period. What about when we've really hurt each other? Like we've actually gotten really angry. We said things we didn't really mean to say, or certain actions happened that now we feel like, oh, I need to like have a break from from the situation. How could someone describe that in still a positive term while still like getting the cooling off period that's needed? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. If you are needing to cool off and there's been some pain, essentially you're asking about that, right? Mm-hmm. I do think that it's highly important to make sure that before you go into a cooling off period, you have some acknowledgement or addressing of everyone's feelings. That would be ideal. If not, then at least when you come back together, that's what tends to turn those situations around. Like, I understand this is really hard in the moment, but if you're the one upset and you're able to say, hey, look, I recognize that you're stressed and I've probably hurt you. I just needed a moment to cool off. Like you're acknowledging how they must be feeling. If you can't do it there before, backing off a little bit, then make sure that that's happening after the fact. Even if you feel like you were the one wrong, if you feel like you were the one that's hurt, if you're going to cut through that tension a little bit, there needs to be some acknowledgement of your partner's feelings. Even if they don't reach out and extend the same understanding towards you, you still need to do that, even if you need to explain your side as well. That tends to cut through those situations really, really well.
Awesome. Love it. All right. So what are more serious causes? We talked about maybe some of the more simple or like benign, bumps in the road that we hit, and we have different causes for wanting to have a little bit more space or some emotional distancing in a relationship. But let's talk a little bit about some of the more serious causes and what the root of those issues are. Okay,
I'm just going to start off with the root. The combining factor with all of these is that narrative or story, how one is describing the situation. So for instance, if there's some long-term stress, we were talking about how, the simple thing is just temporary stress, but if there's long-term stress, someone's so stressed out and one of the partners feels like there's no escape from it. So maybe one of the spouses feels like they're in a dead-end career. They're always going to be working an extreme schedule. I see that sometimes where a spouse might be working 60, 70 hours a week and they don't see any end in sight. And they're like, this is just too much. Or it might be, you have some sort of long-term illness or some sort of mental health problem, and your partner starts saying, well, they've made, they're depressed, they're always going to be depressed, and it's always going to be like this. They're always going to be negative, sad, complaining. It's that that way that it gets described that turns it into a more serious problem. We see the same sort of thing in terms of emotional distancing with that loss of love. They say, I don't have those feelings for you anymore. And what's not said there is they say, this is a permanent state. I don't expect that these feelings could possibly come back. It's, it would be a very different thing if they said, I don't have those feelings for you anymore. And I think that we need to work on building that back up, and we need to fix this. That's a very different way of describing it. One's very temporary, one's unchangeable long term. And the long term one is going to be, it's going to be more serious because of that. Another thing is, if there is a consistent pattern where one partner always feels like they have to engage in the marriage, and the other person is always putting a brake on things. You see this sort of problem, especially in physical intimacy problems, problems with sex in the relationship. If one partner always feels like they are the one initiating, that can be really damaging, and they can say, I keep getting rejected, I keep getting pushed back, and so some social or some emotional distancing might start in those cases. Once again, it's a matter of how they see the relationship and how they describe it that makes it serious. One that is a little different, though, as in terms of a cause, is not necessarily on how you describe it, but just if there is a pattern of where there's cycles of criticism. There's a lot of criticism that comes out and just negativity in general. Your partner might be withdrawn because of how you react when they withdraw. And if you're reacting angry and upset and critical when they withdraw, this only pushes them further away. And I like your example earlier, Heather, because you were describing this exact situation right here. You're saying when Ben withdrew, you used to react more poorly, and that caused further withdrawal.
Exactly.
And so if you get in that sort of cycle, that is not a matter of how you describe the situation. Well, I mean, there is some elements to that, but that in and of itself is a more serious cause. And, without some shift in perspective or professional help, that tends to be a self-perpetuating cycle. It builds on itself. And will pull you further apart. Those
right.
Yeah.
Another thing that I've learned is that when you are the one that you're needing some space, but you don't feel like that's honored, or you're made to feel guilty about needing that, then that only creates further distancing and resentment there. So just I've learned to be really careful with that, with Ben and myself, as a wife and a mother. Like, I feel like sometimes I just need some space, and if that was denied me, or if I was made to feel guilty for that in any way, or shamed by that, then that would possibly cause a lot of bitterness and resentment toward Ben. And if I didn't give him space as well, then that would cause, even more damage to the relationship. Whereas if we honor each other and we give each other that, then that creates a lot of healing and a lot of respect. And then when we're ready, we do come back. Like, the partner will come back when they've got their kind of that need met and kind of their cup refilled, right? They're refueled, then they can come back able to help us with our needs in a better way. So yeah, let's talk about signs that it is serious. Okay, let's kind of differentiate that more benign. We just had a spat and now we both need to cool off and then we're going to be able to come back together and work on this, or we just need a break for whatever reason. What are some signs that it's not so benign, that it actually is more serious?
Now, all of these are going, I'm going to give specific signs, but I'm going to say all of these are a way that the situation is being described, and that's what makes it serious. So if there's an expression of a loss of love, like I don't love you anymore, I think I mentioned this, like I don't love you anymore and this isn't going to change, kind of this idea. Or possibly contempt has set in. If those of you who are really researching marriage matters a lot, you might recognize this. This is one of the 4 horsemen of divorce. This is a principle from Dr. Gottman. So contempt has set in. Most time, meaning that most times your partner is describing you negatively, or the marriage negatively. That is a very serious sign, and it's very likely going to result in emotional distancing. If your spouse sees no way out of their problems or the problems in the marriage, or if your spouse has very little hope in change. Notice, like I said, in each of these, it is a matter of how the situation is being described by the person pulling away. All of these have a potential of being described in many different ways. If you're saying there's no hope for change, that's very different from these are some problems. My husband or my wife needs support in making some changes to make things better. And, so I'm going to make sure that I'm giving them the support that they need. That's a very, very different, it's a very positive, healthy way of looking at a serious problem. But if you're saying, they're never going to change, they don't listen to me ever, that's when you can really tell that this has turned a corner and has turned into a very serious issue in terms of emotional distancing or just problems in the marriage in general.
So help me out, just that I want to make sure that this is clear to me and to everyone. So there's kind of 2 different things going on here, right? There's the way that our partner is describing the situation, right? Their narrative, their story, their use of language. They could be saying something like, I just don't have those feelings for you anymore. I love you, but I'm not in love with you. I don't want to be with you, those kind of things, right? And then we have the other side of like what our story is about what they're saying, right? And the way that we're describing the situation. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, that's correct. And if either of you are looking at this in terms of permanent problems, it's a sign that there are serious problems in the relationship. Whether you're saying my husband or wife will never change, or they're saying to you, you will never change, or I don't love you, it goes either way. And if you're saying my partner who's distancing never wants to be around me, that's a very similar problem, I would say, as my wife is always nagging me or always chasing after me, doesn't leave me alone, is so annoying, or any number of more permanent descriptive traits of your partner.
So even in these kind of situations, though, when we may be feeling hopeless about it, or we feel like our partner is describing things very negatively, that's not the end, correct?
No, I mean, I would say it's a serious situation, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the marriage. Yeah.
Right. And that's why we're here. That's exactly what we're doing.
Exactly. So
let's talk about what do we do in that kind of situation? Many people listening to this are going to be in that kind of exact situation where their partner says any of one of those things and they're kind of feeling that about the relationship. So how do we overcome that?
The smaller issues we talked about is a lot about, clear communication of needs and whatnot. I feel like once it turns this corner into a more serious situation, what's going on is generally the emotionally distant spouse sees no way out, or feels unheard or disrespected. They don't feel, essentially the problem is they don't feel safe with connection. And, in my opinion, the fix to this is a lot of understanding, and assurance. Because, you know, you're talking about earlier, if, you know, in a situation where if one, you know, like say if Ben was needing space and you were you were shutting that down, you were getting upset or angry, or you demanded that he had to talk about it right now, and that kind of pushes you further away. Let's extend that out or amplify that quite a bit. We can easily see how this would be a situation where that communication, those interactions wouldn't feel safe. In this case, the hypothetical situation for Ben. And this is kind of what goes on, is they don't feel safe with connection, or they get to a point where they don't have interest in connection, in which case there still is a need for that understanding in order to help us get to a point where we can find interest. What I mean by this is, if we simply dismiss it, if we get upset, if we get angry, it pushes them further away. They need the feelings that your partner who is emotionally distancing are always valid, even if how they get to those emotions might be misconstrued or misinterpreted. What I mean here is, if they are feeling frustrated or stressed or annoyed or whatever it happens to be, those feelings actually have to be addressed. They do have to have some understanding. Let me explain this a little bit better. Let's say that you know, I can't think of a specific argument, but you know, this is not, you know, an unseen situation in my marriage with Jen, where I'm a little bit stressed, and so I might be a little bit short with Jen or my kids or something. And if Jen then interprets that as Mark is unhappy with me, and she starts to pull back, you know, and she's hurt by that whole situation. Like, this is a situation where she misinterpreted, you know, this hypothetical situation where she misinterpreted how I was reacting. Even in those circumstances, what I'm getting at is, I still need to demonstrate understanding for Jen and how she feels, even if how she got to that point was a misunderstanding. I felt like I was rambling a little bit there. Like I might have, did it, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And I wish I had like a more specific example I could bring to mind as well. Because we often misunderstand each other. We wish that we were mind readers, right? We wish we could just read our spouse's mind. But more often than not, I think that we are guessing at what our spouse is really meaning or intending by their actions or their words. And we don't really know at all until we come with understanding first. And so even if, like you're saying, like even if they had a misunderstanding about what our intent was or what that situation actually was, we still need to validate their feelings first, because their feelings, like, you can never argue with someone's feelings. The way that they feel is what they feel. And you can try to like discredit that or try to persuade them that it's wrong to feel that way, but they still feel that. And our feelings, I mean, think about it. Are your feelings real to you? Yeah. And there's a reason why you got to that conclusion, like why why you're in that emotional state. And until you kind of receive some empathy or some understanding about that, you want to kind of defend your feelings. So that's why we always encourage that understanding first and validate their feelings. Say, I understand you feel hurt. That was not my intention. I did not mean to make you feel hurt, right? And so that's things that we can be taught. Like, we're really not taught how to do that. And so it just kind of becomes like a clashing until we really learn how to kind of put that down and just say, I understand that you're feeling this way, whether it's valid or not, whether it's right or not, whether it's, they're completely off their rocker, because I've been completely off my rocker before, and Ben still has validated the way that I felt, which then made me feel like, okay, whew, all right, he gets how I feel. Now we can work on the problem.
Sure.
That's what you're saying, right?
That's exactly what I'm saying. So the understanding is an important component, but the assurance is another thing that's necessary here. Like, if the problems are serious and there's a lack of trust, like say a trust that things are going to change, or that there can be some love in the relationship, then there needs to be a sense that something can or will be done to kind of move that forward. This is, I think in a lot of cases where this gets gummed up a bit, I have people, I have clients who will say, well, I'm telling my husband, my wife, I'm telling them I'm making changes. I'm telling them what I'm going to do here. I'm telling them everything's going to be okay, that we can have some love here. That's part of this, but like it's a sense that things are actually going to be done, and oftentimes that it takes pairing that assurance with some action, like very close together. So like an example, if there's a lot of emotional distancing and they're like, well, it's because you're always complaining and you're always trying to tell me what to do, well, then you need to say, okay, I get it. That must be hard for you. If you feel like I'm trying to control you, and I'm going to do something about this. And then you say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be calling up a therapist. I want to make sure that I'm doing things well, that I'm handling things well. I'm going to be going and studying. I'm going to be working on, going to be meditating, whatever it happens to be, the action, they need some assurance that change is going to happen. This is if there's a huge loss in trust, that they just have no trust that things will be different. You need to pair that assurance with the action. Otherwise, it's going to be meaningless. And I'm saying that paired together because I see the opposite as well, where people start making changes and they don't talk about it, and so the changes aren't really noticed because their partner is pulling away in a certain mindset, like nothing's going well. So yeah, it's the assurance with the action that's really going to make the biggest difference here.
Yeah, that is exactly the truth. I wish that you guys could see us pre-Thriving Marriage podcast, because while we've been helping couples for years and years and years, it wasn't until after we were working with, really hundreds and thousands of students now all around the world that we realized that addressing that, making those changes alone wasn't enough. We really had to help change the narrative. And that changing your narrative wasn't enough. We had to help you change your spouse's narrative. And that's exactly why Mark and I created the PATH method. And then that's the method that we use that is so effective in helping to overcome those stories. Because you might be making all the positive changes in the world and your spouse just doesn't see it, or they don't trust them, right? And so then you're still left like, well, I did everything I could and it still didn't work. And that's never where we wanted to have our clients or our students be. And we realized that no one else out there was really talking about this, and that we had missed it ourselves, and it had taken working with so many couples for so long to really kind of hone this in. And now what we do is really effective in helping to overcome some of those obstacles. So Mark, any final thoughts here on how to overcome this emotional distancing and why it's so crucial to really build that understanding first? That's our PATH method. The P stands for perspective, which is always creating understanding first.
I'm thinking about this, and I keep having to ask myself whether this is only applicable, say, to my, sometimes my wife and I talk about personality types, where is it only applicable to some couples, some certain personality types? And I keep having to ask myself this, and I keep coming to the conclusion that no, even if you're not the type that's kind of, say, touchy-feely, you don't often get into deep discussions, there are certain needs within a relationship to make it go smoothly, I think, no matter who you are. And so, these sort of principles here of the clear communication, the assurance, the understanding. Your partner might not be open to some of that right in the moment, and that might be a matter of the kind of person that they are. But I will say that these principles, when applied consistently and over time, can have a dramatic effect over time. It's just some people might need a little bit more time to sit with it than others.
Love it. Oh, sorry, kids in the background. That's
You
all
know,
of us right now. So
we all have kids in the background.
oh my goodness. All right. Well, I just want to conclude with a little bit of a mindset perspective here, because I understand one of the biggest things that I hear is that, you know, if they want out, there's nothing I can do. This is hopeless. And the way that is described is just very, very negative, and there's a lot of hopelessness. But what Mark has just illustrated here is that if this is happening in your marriage, even if they want a divorce, even if they say they're not in love with you anymore, even if they're having an affair, there is hope for your marriage. And there is more hope than you could possibly imagine when you start to apply these principles in the right way and start to apply the method in the right way. Incredible things can happen. And it's just incredible to see that things that we didn't know before that really blocked us, we can learn some new skills, and we can learn how to use these new tools and really start to see some different results in our lives. So if you're feeling a lot of hopelessness or a lot of frustration or a lot of fear, like, we get that and we validate the feeling of that, but know that it is possible and that you can choose to move your life forward in a positive direction, no matter what your circumstances are. So with that, we're going to go into our marriage Mythbuster, because we're going a little long, but I really feel like this is a really applicable one, and to give some clarity on this. So we've heard it said before, and even in the marriage it was posted, about this idea of a healing separation. And here's the marriage Mythbuster, that we need a healing separation to save our marriage. So where is this true and where is this not true? Is it needed in my marriage? Is it not needed in my marriage? Mark, give us some clarity on what a healing separation is and if it's a good idea or not.
Yeah. So I hear this quite frequently as a suggestion by some therapists, but it's usually I'm just going to say that not all the therapists suggesting this really understand the principle behind it, because, you know, not all of them are you know, specifically focus in on helping marriages. That might be a side thing that they do. I know, you know, when I, you know, worked at, you know, in a therapy office for a time, like, couples rarely came in, and so it might be, you know, one case out of 30 cases that you might have, if that. So what I'm getting at is, you know, sometimes this is recommended without really understanding. And so we, you know, the layperson sees, oh, separation was recommended from therapy for this other couple that I know. Maybe we should try that. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it even goes further, like, not understanding the principle or why it might be helpful, why it might not be. So one of the biggest myths surrounding like a healing separation is its ability to solve problems or heal in and of itself. And it's why the reason why this myth exists is because of some simple mechanics involved with separation. So, you know, when you are, say, physically separated, not being around each other allows people to cool off. I will grant it that. And in intense relationships where continued interaction is driving people further apart, it can allow for there to be more thoughtful or purposeful interaction. If you're saying, if you're only talking to your husband or wife, you know, once a day or a few times a week, you're probably going to be a little bit more thoughtful with those interactions. Much like when you were dating, you probably put on your best clothes when you were only going out on a date, you know, once a week, because you're trying to impress your partner. It can sometimes provide a taste of what further separation, like divorce, might look like. You know, creating an uncomfortable situation that might propel people towards change. Now, what it does not do is heal things by itself, though. So if separation is the only measure for healing, then the likely outcome when the couple reunites is for things to just go back to the way they were. People don't change simply by being apart. So if you're saying, well, it's nice that now I don't have this stress, we're not fighting quite as much, why don't we come back together? If you actually haven't resolved what was causing those fights to begin with, it's just, the separation basically doesn't matter. You just had a break for a while. If your spouse is suggesting separation as a means to heal, I'm not saying that it's a terrible idea. What I will say, though, is that if that's the plan, make sure that you actually have a plan on how you're going to address problems and have a plan for how you're going to come back together, what conditions you would need for coming back together. And I think a lot of this, the conversation starts with, what do you want from the relationship? Not what's wrong, not why is your partner messing up, but what do you want out of that, and how are you going to work towards that? And if you have that plan in place, then under those conditions, the separation has a chance to be healing. You're taking out a lot of the negativity, a lot of the stress, and you're working towards specific things that you do want to reintroduce back into the marriage. That's a much more healthy situation. That can be a healing separation.
Thank you so much, Mark. I know that that's helping to give some clarity to people that are asking about that. Now, I know that everyone has a unique situation, and that's why we never say that, this one thing is going to be the solution for your exact situation. It really is like a, basis by basis type of thing that we want to make sure that we address your exact challenges in the right way. I got a lot of comments here over in the Thriving Marriage as we're doing this podcast recording live. And so a lot of you are asking, like, what if they have ADHD and they don't listen to me? What if I ask for space and they don't give it to me? What if I'm the one on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? What if they're having this affair, right? All these different things. And so I really encourage you that if you are wanting more help with this, to decide, first of all, what you really want. What do I really, really want? Not the story, not the narrative, not what they're saying, but what do I want at the end of the day? And once you have that destination in mind, then the right people, the right opportunities, and the right circumstances will guide you to that result. And maybe that will bring you here to working with Mark and I. That's what we do here at High Thrive Coaching. I love this comment from one of our clients. I have lots of hope since joining High Thrive. There is more hope than you could possibly imagine when you decide what you want and you take action on the avenues that present themselves. So if that speaks to you and you want more help with this, we always encourage you to come to highthrivecoaching.com/apply, where you can have a completely complimentary consultation with us, and we can see how we can use this path method to, overcome the emotional distancing, overcome the trust issues, overcome, any of the challenges that you might be facing at this time in the right way. So that's highthrivecoaching.com/apply. So thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that this was helpful for you and that you take some kind of positive action forward in your marriage right now, today. Decide something that you're going to do today to move yourself in the right direction. So thank you, Mark. Next week, we are going to talk about how to ignite your intimacy and how a couple can find a happy medium when they're on the opposite ends of the intimacy spectrum, whether intimacy is dead in your marriage or if you just are wanting to take things up a notch. This podcast is going to be for you on how to ignite your intimacy in your marriage. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.